This time on Rad Rat Video, we learn this trick. Let's get started. Welcome to Rad Rat Video. Here on this channel, we learn something new about skateboarding 3 times a week, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We're talking about trick histories, skateboard history in general. We're talking about game reviews, and also learning tricks here on the Shred School from all different kinds of skateboarding genres like freestyle, which is what we're doing today. So we're learning a trick that looks like this. And you may have a few questions about that. First, isn't that called a Primo? It's not. A Primo is only the sliding version. It's like saying a lip slide versus a disaster. You wouldn't say lip slide stall, you know, so it's not a big deal. A lot of people say Primo, but technically it is a rail stand and a rail flip to rail. Second question, isn't that really hard? This is one of those tricks that looks a lot more impressive than it really is. It's not crazy difficult to do. There's a couple different techniques you can do to learn how to catch those wheels and land, and we'll talk you through that. I think there's a good chance that you can learn this in your first session, at least land one. It may take a while to get consistent with it, but it's really not that bad. Third question, what's up with your board? This is a freestyle board and is not required for this trick. A lot of people do this on a normal street board. I think it's possible on any street setup that you can find, unless the trucks are way too big. But for the most part, you can do this on anything you want. The positives for a freestyle board are the wheels are offset, so they cover up the axle. So the axle nut doesn't stick out and get scratched up, and then eventually, you know, you can't turn it anymore. And the shape is a little bit better for freestyle. But at this point, when you're just learning some of the basics, you are completely fine doing it on your street board. But one thing that'll help a lot is having the wheel and truck setup be a little bit thinner than the deck. If the board is tipped this way slightly, you can put more weight on the tail and pop it a little bit harder, a little more sharply. If you're tipped this way, then right when you start to put some weight on it, it'll flop over. So I had a lot of trouble with that with this setup. I think the wheels are more offset. They cover more of the axle than I was expecting when I bought the truck. So it's not the perfect setup. I'm gonna have a lot of the same troubles you will on a standard street board, but I should be able to talk you through with some of those issues. So let's get into the trick. There are a couple things you're gonna wanna know before you get into it too far, which is the regular rail flip. It's a varial 1 3/4 flip out of heel side rail. It's the heel side rail, heel side of the board. This is the rail standing on the heel side rail. That's why it's called that. And the regular rail flip, very simple, not necessarily all that easy. It may take a little bit of experimentation, but it's simple. You basically put your foot right about there and you do a pop shove it. That's it. There's 3 different things to look at with it. First is exactly where on the tail you are. If you're more toward the end here, it'll flip a little bit easier, but it tends to spin too much. So I stay away from being too far down there. And the other 2 things are the amount of downward motion and the amount of backward motion. Play around with those 3 things and you'll be able to do that trick with no problem. The second thing you're going to want to learn first is the half rail flip back to rail, like that. That one is very simple, but it's really going to get you into the mindset of landing on the rail and feeling comfortable, expecting the board there and knowing, building a little bit of confidence doing that. So to do that, you put your foot right about here, not that far off from the tail or from the wheel, like right about there. You flip it kind of fast, but you barely jump. That's one of the secrets to landing things to rail. You can flip at the same speed, but if you jump less, you'll catch it sooner. So that's one of your options there. So you flip it kind of fast, but you just hop slightly and then slam your feet down. And if you do that, the board isn't spinning, so you're gonna be stuck with the wheels. The board's not gonna be way over here or anything. Just hop quick, land back on those wheels, and you'll be in good shape. So practice those a little while, get used to the feeling of being on the rail, the feeling of flipping out of it and all that kind of stuff, and you should be ready to put them together for the full rail flip to rail. Now let's get into that one. So the way you set your feet up, basically the same. There will be some experimentation in there because there are those different methods for catching it on the rail, but for me it's about the same. The way that I do it, with this variation anyway, is I'll flip it basically the same. I'll actually jump a little bit higher and flip it a lot slower. One of the big issues for me is trying to stay consistent with the regular version and the back to rail version, because we're only talking about a quarter flip difference. You know, whether you're flipping it too much or too little, it really doesn't matter. The point is that it's very close to the normal version. So if your standard rail flip, you can do it casually. How are you going to do that and also casually do a quarter less? You have to have a different technique. It has to feel different. It has to flow a little bit differently. So there are a couple ways to do that. For me, like I was saying, I actually flip it a lot slower, but I jump quite a bit higher and I let it come around under me, and then I land back on it. And that one is a little bit weird. The reason why I'm doing it that way right now is because of the truck width situation I was having, where if I flip it too fast, the board just kind of flops on the ground and doesn't want to go anywhere. So that was the way that I came up with that would allow me to do the trick without having to buy new wheels or whatever. So that's one way to go, is to flip it a lot slower, but give it plenty of air time. Pull your feet way up, wait for it to come around, and try to stomp back down on those wheels. If you're practicing doing the rail to rail, just the half flip, you'll be familiar with trying to land on the wheels and being prepared for landing up here. That was one of the weird things, where if you ever accidentally land to rail, if you're doing a kick flip or whatever and you just accidentally land on the rail, you're generally not gonna actually hold on to it and land it because you weren't expecting it. You know, you're expecting to land a few inches lower down here, but when you're up here, it kind of catches you by surprise. But if you're prepared for it, it should feel weird if you land on the grip tape. You should be off balance if you land on the grip tape. You should be ready for those wheels. All right. One of the other methods is to flip it faster. And on my old setups when I could, this is the way that I would usually do it. I would actually flip the board a lot faster, but I would barely jump at all. So with the rail flip, if your board's set up right, it's really not that hard to do a triple. You can do a varial 2 3/4 and land it, no problem. Because you can really put that pressure down and just slam it, and then it goes crazy. And if you do that, but you barely hop, and you just sort of like the regular half flip, you just barely hop and you stomp back down right away, you can catch it on there no problem. And there are ones I've done where I've actually caught it on the rail in the air and put it down, because you get used to that exact motion. So again, as long as it's different from your normal rail flip motion, you can work with it. You just have to figure out how much clearance to give the board, how much to try to catch it, if you should stomp down or if you should let it float in the air for a while, that kind of thing. So work on that. That's going to be your biggest problem, is finding what works best for you, what works for your setup, what works for your comfort, and then work from there. For me, I would say, if you can pull it off with your setup, do a really, really fast flip and just kind of do this. That'll work easiest. I think it looks a little bit cooler because the board just goes crazy and then you're suddenly back in rail. That's a really cool way to go. Something else to consider, for me, I taught this as a varial 1.5 because that's the standard. When you say rail flip to rail, that's what most people are going to think of. But to me, it's actually a lot easier to do a varial double back to rail, and I land with the board facing this way. I prefer it, gives me some more options. I'm not just back where I started. But that one works a bit easier because it is, again, more different than a normal rail flip. So try that too. You can even try a 2.5 instead of just a 1.5. It might be a little bit too hard for you to flip it quickly, but not that much. So just don't be afraid to experiment a little bit. One of the coolest things about freestyle is that no two people do the exact same tricks. There's a lot of different methods to do certain things, especially like truck stuff or Caspers or whatever. Some people are going to do it all on the nose. Your board might have a separate, like a flat nose and a big tail. Maybe you do some stuff with the board backwards. Maybe you do some stuff with the opposite foot that most people do. You wouldn't really think of it switch. It's just kind of the opposite way. A bunch of different things. So don't be afraid to come up with your own variations. Another option that I tried to do for a while, and I had this going for me for a few years, a long time ago, is I would do my regular rail flips off the tail, but I'd do my rail flips to rail with the nose. I would do them switch. And the point of that, again, is just be different. Every time I do one switch, it's back to rail. So that way I can just pound that in and get consistent with that one motion and not try to juggle all these very minor differences. So that's an option. it didn't really work all that well for me. It worked for a little while, but it felt kind of weird switching back and forth all the time. It is something that's really not that hard to do switch, so I mean, give it a try. It's definitely something worth worth a minute to go ahead and try it out. So those are the different techniques that you can do. You have to experiment a bit and find the right one that works for you. And you should be able to land one within not too much time, probably in your first session. It takes a little while to get used to them, but hopefully you can get out there and do that. If you want a freestyle board, that's definitely an option, but just be very careful with the way that you set it up. And that's it for this time. Check out some more trick tips I did right here. I do have a full playlist of freestyle trick tips. A lot of them are pretty old, but I'm slowly redoing some of these. So check those out. I also have street stuff, plenty of street stuff. I have a mini ramp section that I did. I don't have a mini ramp anymore, but some of those videos are still up right there. And until next time, thank you for watching.